I urge you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies. Now, this is the hard part. By the mercies of God, this is why we need His mercy, to present your body. That word present in the Hebrew or in the Greek is peristeme. Remember the word histeme that I talked about? That people have taken a position apart from the faith, apisteme. That's away from the faith. This is parahisteme. So this is literally means, para means close or near to. So this means an abiding close to. Now, why is it saying present? Because it came from the picture of people offering sacrifices and bringing their sacrifice to the priest, handing it over to them, and standing close as the priest examined it and prepared it. In other words, they put it off to the priest. It was all in the priest doing. The preparation of the sacrifice, all of it, the preparing of the sacrifice, the examining of the sacrifice, all of it was in the priest's hands. They just stayed by ready. That's this word, peristeme. So I beseech you, therefore, brethren, it literally means to stand beside, to present your bodies. Now, I'm unpacking this. Guys, we got to hear this. That word bodies is the word soma. It's where it doesn't just mean the physical. We're made of three parts, spirit, soul, and body. This is going to come into play here in a second. The word soma encompasses all parts. Does that make sense? It's interesting because it's a noun of the verb sozo, which means to save and to restore. So that which is being restored is a holistic thing. God's salvation to you was not just your spirit. It was your entire being. Physically, spiritually, mentally. That's coming into play here because what Paul is saying is you need to take your entire being, spirit, soul, and body, and give it into the hands of the Lord and take your hands off but stay close to Him. That's the picture he's saying here. Present your bodies a living sacrifice. Present the whole unit. Present it. Give it to the Lord and take your hands off. Which tells me this one thing. One of the biggest keys to the spiritual victory of the Christian walk is this statement. We used to say it, like when I first got here, we used to say it every Sunday. So we're going to do it again. We used to do this. We haven't done this for probably 2 years. Turn to the person next to you. Look them in the forehead. Look them in the eye, not the chin or the forehead. You ready? Come on, get the gaze. All right. You ready? And say these words. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's all about Him. If we really put that into practice, guys, we would never know defeat. Because the minute we begin to lose the battle is the minute we begin to make it about us. Let me say it this way. The minute we begin to make it about us is the minute we begin to lose the battle. Does that make sense? Because Paul's saying, therefore, and here's the thing, he's not talking to unbelievers, he's talking to brothers. He's talking to people of the faith. For from Him, Jesus, and through Him, Jesus, and to Him are all things. To Him be the glory forever. Therefore, through the mercies of God, I'm imploring you, I'm rallying you. Give yourself to Him and take your hands off. Which is your spiritual service of worship. That word spiritual in the Greek is the word logikos. Anybody want to guess what English word we get from it? Logical. So what he's saying is, look, guys, you can't do this. He is the source of all things. He is the means of all things. He is the destination of all things. Therefore, the logical thing to do is to present your entire being to Him and take your hands off. That's the logical thing to do. That's what makes sense. Why? Because you can't do it. You can't do it in yourself. What better message for the first of the year to set the course than to say, guess what? It's not about me. It's not about you. It's all about Him. Amen. Next time you're arguing with your spouse, do not start with the phrase, it's not about you. But it's okay to say, you know what? It's not about me. It's all about Him. But that ought to bring humility and not self-righteousness. Does that make sense? Because chances are, if there's an argument, it's because you're making it about you. So don't even say that to your spouse. You ought to get alone and say that to you and God. God, it's not about me. I'm sorry for making it. Listen, I got to preach this to me before I preach it to you. This woman knows that I have to put this into practice. And then when I'm not putting this into practice, she helps remind me. Does that make sense? My children know. And there are times that I need a minute because I realize that the living sacrifices crawl off the altar, and that's the problem with living sacrifices. They tend to crawl off the altar. That's why this is an ongoing word. It's in the prolonged sense, and it's in the continual context grammatically. In other words, keep presenting yourself. Present yourself and keep presenting yourself a living sacrifice. Keep doing it. Does that make sense? Here's why. How are we doing? Okay. And do not be conformed. That word basically means to mold it into, or it also means to masquerade, putting on an act. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed. That's the word metamorpho. Anybody want to guess what English word we get from that word, metamorpho? Metamorphosis. It literally means to change from one thing to another. It describes an inward change producing an outward change. To change from one thing inwardly to another by the renewing of your mind. This word renewing, it literally means to make new again, and it's translated in other places to renovate. How many have ever done a renovation of your house? Anybody ever done a renovation of something? Okay. Did you just put the new stuff in, or was there something you had to do before you put the new stuff in? What'd you have to do? You had to tear some stuff down. You had to take the old stuff out. That's the connotation of this word. Listen, it's not just about taking the old stuff out. It's about putting the new stuff in. And it's not just about putting the new stuff in. You got to start by taking the old stuff out. Our problem is twofold in America. Some have tried to take the old stuff out, but they never replace it with anything. And so the stuff that they replace it with is not godly. It's demonic. But some have tried to put the new stuff in without even taking out the old stuff. So what they've got is the new stuff on a layer, but everything underneath keeps surfacing. Does that make sense? The renewal of the mind is a twofold thing. It's a removal of the things that were the familiar. The things that we were used to, the ways of thinking that does that make sense what I'm saying? Because I believe that the biggest access that the enemy has, boy, listen to me on this. The biggest access that the enemy has to our life are the things that are familiar. I'm going to say it again. The biggest access that the enemy has in our life are the things that are familiar. Because those are the things we're not on our guard about. Are you hearing me? The biggest access. So he's saying, don't be molded by this world, but be transformed, be changed into something else, metamorphosized into something else. Why? By the renewing, by the renovation of your mind. Which is awesome. Because it's not just you doing it, you've presented your entire being to God, and the next statement is, all right, now that you're His, now that you're on the altar, let Him teach you how to think. We don't do that. Why? Because it's uncomfortable and it's not familiar. So a strange thought comes my way. Maybe it's a failure on my part. Maybe I've been to church on Sunday morning, and I got the victory, and I've declared everything that we've all declared these things. We've declared I am who He says I am. And I get out and I drop the ball. And all of a sudden, the same old thoughts. See, you can't do anything right. See? That's what you always do. Yeah? Yeah? That's because this is who you are. Anybody else have those thoughts? A nice try, but you always fail. Do you know why we receive those thoughts? Because we've made a history of receiving them. Do you know another reason why we receive those thoughts? Because to fight against them is not comfortable. Because my emotions are attached to it. Because the fact of the matter is, sometimes a good old pity party is incredibly seductive. Are you hearing me? If someone else begins to think that way about themselves, what would you say? Seriously. Ask yourself this. Well, I'm just a failure. What if someone came to you and said, I'm just a failure? What would you tell them? You would say, no, you're not. Listen, I know you guys, you would say you are made in the image of, you are who God says you are. And you'd say that to other people, but you got to start by saying it to you. Does that make sense? Do you know why you don't say it to you? It's because it doesn't feel good to say it to you. Because the pity is seductive. If you're not careful, everything you just declared is made null and void by other declarations to the contrary. What is that? That's called a seducing spirit. That's called a doctrine of demons. You didn't let God renovate your mind. So what do? Well, listen to the effect on this. What's at stake? By the renewing of your mind, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. That word "so that," the word "prove" is the word, it means to test, to discern, to recognize as genuine. In other words, you're not going to recognize the genuine will of God. That word "will" is desire, intention, purpose, what pleases Him and what doesn't. You're not going to know who He is unless you let Him renovate your mind. And unless you know who He is, you will not know who you are. So what He's saying is, you're doing this so that you can discern, so that you can recognize as genuine what the will of God is. I marvel at people who talk about knowing the will of God and all of this, and yet their life consistently testifies that they don't. Do you know why that is? Because they've not made themselves a living sacrifice. This says you present your entire body into His hands, let Him renovate your mind, and then and only then will you be able to decide or to know what is the genuine will of God. Does that make sense? So as I was pondering this, the thought came to me, to the degree that I remain unsurrendered is the degree that the enemy has open access to my life. And to the degree that he has open access to my life is the degree that I will never know the will of God. And to the degree that I am unable to know the will of God, to that degree I open myself up to deception. Does that make sense? I don't have the luxury of thinking my thoughts, guys. And neither do you if you're going to be a believer. If you're going to be a follower of Christ, if you're going to be a disciple of Christ. Listen. Colossians chapter 3, Paul says it again. I'm going to go here really quickly. Therefore, if you have been raised up with Christ, keep seeking. That's the word zeteo. I want to bring that word out. That word zeteo literally means to seek in order to find, to crave, to plot, to endeavor, to require, and to demand. One translation said to seek by meditating and pondering it. Keep seeking the things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand, and set your mind on the things above and not on the things of earth. In other words, that word set your mind literally means to be disposed, to entertain yourself, to meditate on, to strive for, to interest yourself in, and it talks about a pattern and a disposition. In other words, and here's the thing, it talks about a pattern and a disposition and orientation, but it's a command. It's in the imperative form. It's in the present imperative active form, which means it's present, which means it's ongoing. Imperative, which means it's a demand right now, and it's active, which means you make the choice to do it. I say that because it's combating that whole mentality. Well, that's just the way I am, so don't be that way. Well, how can I not be that way? Present your bodies through the mercies of God. Present your whole self as a living sacrifice. Let God renovate your mind, and start by letting Him convince you that He can make you differently. Does that make sense? Start by fighting against the seductive self-pity feelings and say, God, I am who you say I am, not who even I say I am right now. Not because I know who I say I am right now, but that's not who you say I am. That's how you orientate yourself to Him. You set your affections. What His opinion is becomes more important than what your opinion is. What He says about you becomes more important than what anyone else says about you. Does that make sense? Now turn to John. Guys, Jesus doesn't ask us to do anything He Himself did not do. In fact, 1 John says, he who abides in Him must walk also as He walked. So John chapter 5, Jesus puts this into practice, and He demonstrates exactly how He lived. I think as far as discipleship goes, as far as learning to follow Christ, as far as presenting yourself a living sacrifice and letting Him renovate your mind, I don't know of a more important verse than this. He's referring and He's responding, and He says this, I can do nothing of my own initiative. As I hear, I judge. First of all, that word hear, I want to point that out. I pointed it out before. It's the word akuo. It's used 439 times in the New Testament. 439 times in the New Testament. It's the Greek equivalent of the Hebrew word shama, which is used over 1,100 times in the Old Testament. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Here, it's the Shema. Mark chapter 4, what is the greatest commandment? The greatest commandment is this. Mark chapter 12, the greatest commandment is this. Hear, O Israel, hear, the Lord your God is one, and you will love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So it literally means an obedient hearing. This is the key. It's an obedient hearing. Does that make sense? The hearing is an obedient hearing. It's not just hearing, it's hearing and applying. Akuo, hearing and applying. And it's used preceding the greatest commandment. In other words, you can't fulfill the great commandment without listening. You can't. And not just listening, but listening in order to receive your instructions. Listening in order to obey. That's the connotation of this word akuo. That's used 439 times in the New Testament. You think it's important? 439 times in 27 books. That's pretty significant. You think maybe it has something to do with our Christian walk? Yeah. You think it maybe has something to do with the renovation of our mind? Of course it does. Because how is your mind going to be renovated? It's going to be renovated by not just by what you hear, but by what you receive into you and apply. So the way your mind is going to be renovated is by hearing the voice of God and applying it. Does that make sense? But then he goes on and he says this, as I hear, I judge. That word judge is a sobering word because it's the word krino. Here's what all that word judge means. It means to distinguish, to separate, to think, to determine, to approve, to decide, to decree, to conclude, to govern, to have an opinion about. So let me say it this way. Jesus himself said, I can do nothing of my own accord, but what I hear from the Father, that's how I form my opinions. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What I hear from the Father, let's just take that one. What I hear from the Father, that's how I form my opinions? I'm sorry, I think somewhere in the Greek it says what I read on Facebook, that's how I form my opinions. No, that would be a doctrine of demons. What I heard on the news, that's how I form my opinions. Well, that would be very accurate in our society, wouldn't it? That's an accurate assessment. Most people form their opinions based on what other people say and who says it the loudest. Really, don't they? And most people have an opinion to offer about something. Most people have an opinion to offer about something. And most of the time, it's uninformed, and most of the time, it's based on how they feel. So they allow how they feel or what they want to feel to dictate how they think. What Jesus is saying is this, guys, I don't have the luxury of having my own opinion. I got to base my opinion on what I hear from the Father. Now, if Jesus lived that way, how in the world are we supposed to live a different way? Because if there was anyone who ever walked this earth that should have been able to form his own opinions, it would have been Jesus. Are you hearing me on that? But he goes on and he says, no, it's not just my opinions, it's how I think. It's what I determine. It's the conclusions I come to. I don't even form conclusions unless I hear the Father form those conclusions. Boy, man, that sure would take away a lot of stress in the church in America. We would just simply stop, jump to conclusions about each other's motives and get alone with God and hear His voice and let Him speak to our heart. Does that make sense? I see that. I see it in responses. I see it in responses to ongoing city events and city things that are coming. We jump to conclusions about people's motives. Well, they're this, well, they're this, well, they're this. And what happens is we listen to a voice that's not God's. Where did it come from? I don't know, but we're giving heed to it and it's not Him because we're forming opinions that this person is demonic. This person's out to get me. This person is wicked. This person is evil. This person is opposed to me. This person is my enemy. And all the while, we're just listening to the little imposter voices of the devil. And sometimes we're saying it's our own conclusion. Jesus said, look, I don't even come to conclusions unless I hear that my Father says this. I so highly respect Pastor Levon Dozier, and I've shared this before. His wife and his daughter were the target of a racial attack. Some van tried to run them off the road. And as they ran past them, literally trying to run them off the road, shouted horrible racial slurs to them. And almost caused a serious wreck. And that was their intent. I so respect my friend. Because I called him to see how he was doing and to let him know we were there for him. And he said, well, I'll be honest. He said, I've got to get to my happy place. What he meant was I have to get alone with the Lord, and that's what he said. I've got to get alone with the Lord before I respond to this. I have to get alone with God because I know what I want to respond and how I want to respond in my flesh. And I've got to get alone with God and get his mind on it. And so there were days that he didn't respond. He didn't even respond on Facebook. There were days. But when he did respond, it was so loving. It was so Christ. It was so transformative. Levon came out actually from that and he said, you know what? Our problem is not a race problem. Our problem is a love problem. Guys, that's divine. You think maybe that's what Jesus thinks about that? I think maybe it is. Guys, Jesus said, I don't do anything my own initiative. But how I hear, that's how I form my opinions. That's how I think. That's how I decide. That's how I conclude. He had to get off by himself with the Father over and over again. Because, and here's why. This is, okay, so go back to seek those things which are above. That word zeteo, which means to crave, which means to demand, which means to require. Listen to what he says. And my judgment is just because I do not seek. That's the word zeteo, same word that Colossians 3 uses. I do not seek my own. That word my own, listen, this is powerful. In fact, I got this one. I was looking this one up right before service because I just wasn't settled. And the Lord kept drawing my attention to the word my own. And I'm like, okay, it means my own. And I don't know. In fact, I couldn't get much more definitions than that. And so I'm researching, and every dictionary, this word, it's the word emos, and it means my own. It means my own. It means my own. Then I got to the ancient root of the word, and it doesn't just mean my own. It means belonging to or proceeding from me. Whoa. For I do not seek the things that belong to me, and I do not seek the things that proceed from me. But I don't seek my will. That word will is choice, purpose, desire, pleasure, inclination. I don't seek the choices that come from me. I don't seek the choices that belong to me. Whoa, whoa. I'm not seeking the choices that belong to me? Think about that. Well, it's my choice. It's my right. Yeah, but you're not supposed to seek that if you're going to live like Jesus. I don't seek what I have a right to. I don't seek the choices that belong to me. I definitely don't seek the choices that proceed from me. Purpose. I don't seek my purposes. Desires. I don't seek my desires. Pleasures. I don't seek my pleasure. Inclination. That's what this word also means. I don't seek my inclinations. Listen, I cannot follow that which I'm inclined to unless that which I'm inclined to is heavenly. Does that make sense? But I seek the will of my Father who sent me. Whew, man. Guys, that's it. In fact, he said, I am craving and requiring my Father's choices. I'm craving and requiring my Father's purposes. I'm craving and requiring my Father's inclination. And because I'm craving and requiring that, and because I'm hearing His voice, then I know that what my choices are good and right. Present yourselves, therefore, to God as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your logical act of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Romans 12. Jesus lived it. I don't seek my own choices. I don't seek my own opinions. I seek the opinions of my Father. And when I seek and crave the opinions of my Father, and I get those opinions because I'm hearing His voice, because I've learned to recognize His voice, then I act. And how do I do that? I put myself into His hands and I determine what His Word says. Listen, I don't even determine. I read and let Him speak to me. And the minute that my opinions and choices and desires contradict what's in His Word, that's the minute I got to change, not His Word. And I don't twist his word to shape my circumstances. Because what's interesting is what Paul in chapter 12 goes on to. Right after he talks about doing this so that you can understand what the will of God is, he says this. Look at verse 3. For through the grace given me, I say to everyone among you not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think. But to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith. In other words, guys, there's one reason you won't do this, and that's because you think more highly of yourself than you ought. Let me just say this. I didn't say that. Scripture says it. Listen, I didn't write it, guys. I'm just required to live it, and so are you. Does that make sense? There's only one reason you would not put yourself in the hands of God and let Him renovate your mind. Why? Because you think of yourself a little too highly. I'm not trying to be harsh. But how many times does the word say, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him and He will direct your paths. Lean not on your own understanding. Do not be wise in your own eyes. My favorite passage, Proverbs chapter 26. 12 verses, 11 verses. I've said this before, but guys, listen. It really hits to to thinking of yourself more highly than you ought. 11 verses in chapter 26 of Proverbs, actually 10 verses. 10 verses. It starts, like snow in summer and like rain in harvest, so honor is not fitting for a fool. Verse 3, a whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, a rod for the back of fools. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be like him. Answer a fool as his folly deserves, that he not be wise in his own eyes. He cuts off his own feet and drinks violence, who sends messages by the hands of a fool. Like the legs which are useless to the lame, so is a proverb in the mouth of fools. Some of these are funny. Like one who binds a stone in a sling, so is he who gives honor to a fool. Like a thorn which falls into the hand of a drunkard, so is a proverb in the mouth of fools. Like an archer who wounds everyone, so is he who hires a fool or who hires those who pass by. Like a dog returns to his vomit is a fool who repeats his folly. What do you think the Lord thinks about fools? But read verse 12. Do you see a man wise in his own eyes? There's more hope for a fool than for him. Wow. I'd rather be a fool than wise in my own eyes. Despite all, really. Because at least there's more hope for me. Guys, the message of the Lord this year, you must learn the sound of my voice and stop giving heed to other voices. This year, what's done is done. Draw from your past. Do not let your past draw from you. Now, learn to listen to the sound of the one who wants to renovate your mind so that you can be able to know what His good and perfect will is. Because you can't do it if you won't let Him renovate it, and He won't renovate it if you won't listen and obey what He's saying. And you won't do that if you don't put yourself in His hands and say, okay, here I am. It's not about me. It really is, guys. That's really vital. So turn to the person again. Turn to the person next to you again. I want to say it again. You ready? Say it. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's all about Him. So I've looked myself. And guys, I'm with you. Listen, I'm with you. I know the struggle because I struggle with you. I fight it also. That's how I know that pity parties are seductive. How do I know that? Because I've had to resist and I've had to repent for giving in to them. That's how I know when you're not feeling a certain way, it's hard to receive a voice from God that contradicts how you're feeling. How do I know that? Because I live it just right along with you guys. And the fact of the matter is, there have been so many times I've heeded a voice that wasn't God's, and I've let it affect my entire day, which began to affect the entire atmosphere of my household. Listen, that's a whole other aspect I don't want to go into just yet. That's a sermon for another day. But the fact of the matter is, there are times that my listening to a voice that was not God's affected the climate of my entire household. And that can't happen. Because I've got to give an account for that. Does that make sense? So I'm repenting to my family. I'm repenting to my family for listening to voices that are not God's and letting it affect our atmosphere. There have been times we've had strife and contention, and I've been the cause of that because I was not listening to a voice that wasn't. I was not listening to God's voice. I was listening to another voice that was telling me things about me that I'm used to believing, so therefore they're familiar. Are you hearing me? So I'm with you in this. And as your pastor, I'm committing to tune my ears to his voice. As your spiritual leader, Todd family, I'm committing to tuning my ears to his voice. Mom, where's my mom? As your son, I'm committing to tuning my ears to his voice. And if that's you, can we just stand and make that commitment? Can we just stand and make that commitment together? And I don't have it on screen, but we said the last part of the declaration. God, you are who you say you are. And you will do what you say you will do. But Lord, right now we declare, I am who you say I am. Would you just declare that out loud? Let's declare it together in the name of Jesus. I am who you say I am. It's not on the screen, bro. It's okay. I am who you say I am. One more time. In the name of Jesus, I declare I am who you say I am, Lord Jesus. And I will be who you say I will be. And by the mercies of God, I will not listen to any voice that's not yours. By the mercies of God, guys. The same God who calls us to it also empowers us to do it by his mercies. Every heart free. Is every heart free? What's that? We are. I forgot all about that. We just got that, don't we? Huh. Well, that's appropriate, isn't it? While you're standing, Matt, will you come up? Wes, can you help me? Do you feel up to it? All right. Just stand. Tell you what. Stand right there. Oh, yeah. And you stand right on that end. Just stand. And guys, what's that? Oh, do you need the stool? Here. Okay. I forgot we were taking communion today. This is the first Sunday of the new year. This is a very appropriate time to take this. So here's what we're doing. Actually, Matt, just move over to that end a little bit. You guys come down the outer aisles and go back to your seat in the middle. That's very appropriate because this is the new covenant. This is a new year. Yeah. Christ in us, the hope of glory. This is how we walk this, guys, tuning our ears to his voice. So, in reinforcing of your declaration also, would you just come and get the elements and hold on to them, get the bread and the wine, and let's solidify the deal. Let's seal the deal. Let's just confirm, not to each other, but to him. I am who you say I am. Yeah. So come gather if you would like to take the elements. Just go back to your seat and hold on to them. Remain standing if you would. One of the most transformative truths that I've ever realized is that I can believe that God will do what he says he will do, not because of my merit, not because of my success, not because of my failures, but because of his blood and his sacrifice. He makes us who he says we are to be by renovating us, and he does that through the blood of Christ. What you've got in your hands represents the only grounds you ever need to claim the promises of Jesus. Represents the only grounds you need to proclaim his promises. The blood of Christ. It's the blood of the covenant, guys. You got that? Okay. Yeah. Sound booth. Kyle, you got one, buddy? Marsh, do you go? Church family, man, I love you all. And I'm so honored to walk this with you because he's making us into his body. He's making us like him. Sorry, buddy. So on the night he was betrayed, he took the bread and broke it. Blessed it and broke it. When he did, he said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Take and eat." In the same way, he took the cup and he said, "This is the blood. This is my blood, the blood of the new covenant, which is shed." It's the only grounds, guys. There are no other grounds by which we stand. And his blood makes all things new. So take and drink. Every heart free. All right. And the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord lift his countenance upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and give you peace. And go in that peace, my friends. Go and flow and let him transform you. You're released.